Hey Gardener, Taylor here from the Community Garden Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to provide you with some housekeeping items before we get started. If you're new to the podcast, every week, every 2 weeks, the beginning of the podcast gets updated. So the information that I'm delivering to you right now is relevant and will be removed when it's no longer relevant. So if you've already heard this, if you're binge watching or binge listening, fast forward to about 5 or 6 minutes and we'll launch into the actual episode. So for today, it is currently the week of October 20th. And for folks in the Northern Hemisphere or for folks who are in similar zones, I'm in zone 6B and my first frost date is supposed to be early October. It's now October 20th and we still haven't actually had a frost, but the plants are starting to be damaged from the cold. We're getting about -3 degrees Celsius overnight right now, at least tonight. So we're pretty much done in the garden now. If you haven't had a chance, go into your garden and just remove. Actually, you could technically leave your entire garden, but if you're planning to remove anything from your garden, go ahead and snip the plants at the base. Don't actually pull them up out of the soil as long as they weren't diseased. You can go ahead and let them break down into the soil, and it also helps with better water access for next year, getting water down into the soil, and will help a little bit with soil erosion. If your plants were diseased, pull them out fully. You can also leave all of your plants over winter. You do not need to take them out of your garden. Don't let anyone make you think so. So now that we're done with the season, there's likely nothing else coming out of your garden. I still have a few loofahs, some flowers still going, a couple of small things, but for the most part, the season is over, folks. So my suggestion to you over the next couple of weeks, this will probably be the last time I update this until realistically November, December. I would really love for you to make notes about your gardening season. Please, please, please journal. Write down the things that you learned this year. Write down the things that you want to do differently next year. Write your observations down. Write your questions down. Write all your ideas down. Spring you will thank winter you, okay? Please. Also, as you're out in your garden mourning its loss, if you see any seeds that have matured, you can go ahead and pop them off your plants. Marigolds are a really fun way to save seeds. You'll wait for the seed heads to, become dry and crunchy, and they usually turn black. You can go ahead and pop them off. You can store them in a paper bag. There's lots of fun plants to pull seeds off of. Snapdragons, the little heads turn brown, and then they have little holes in the top, and you can flip it over and shake the seeds into your hand. Another fun one is coriander or cilantro. It's very obvious when the seeds are ready, so take a peek at the plants that are still in your garden, see if you can pull any seeds off them. Also, this is for anyone listening to this podcast. If you've ever thought about organizing a community garden, requesting a community garden in whatever area you live in, now is the time to start thinking about that if you have any sort of winter break. So right now, we're not going to be gardening now until March, April. So we do all of our prep work during the winter months. So this is when we take new garden requests. This is when we assess new sites. We discuss partnerships with different organizations. So if this is something that you have been personally wanting to do or your organization has been wanting to do, now is the time to start prepping. Okay, let's talk about some local activities. So these are folks who are in Southern Ontario. You live in Brantford, Brant County, Hamilton, Haldimand, Norfolk, and you want to get involved with our organization. We have a couple of things coming up that I want to put on your radar. So we are participating in the Brantford Santa Claus Parade. November 30th, we are having another parade float. Last year, we had a really fun 50-foot parade float. One of our volunteers, Ken, built a massive greenhouse on the float. I made a bunch of vegetable costumes. They were like sandwich board costumes. It was so much fun. The float definitely was DIY, but it was so cute and we really had a blast doing it together. So we're going to be doing it again this year. If you want to participate, our parade committee is going to be meeting on October 20th in the evening virtually, and you can get that link from me by emailing grow@egcgbrant.ca, or you can take a peek at our show notes page for the podcast and click the Contact Us button, and that would be the communitygardenpodcast.ca. So Santa Claus Parade, come join us. You get to dictate how much time you can give. You do not need to have any experience. Next thing, so this is very exciting. A couple of years ago, we hosted an Earth Day Community Garden Building Festival. Nope, Earth Day Community Building Festival, and we're going to be kind of re-envisioning that festival as a garden festival this year located at the Greenhouse and Learning Center. It'll be the grand opening. So that'll be happening in June of 2025. It's now all hands on deck to get this festival planned. So if you want to volunteer with us on the committee on the day of, whatever the case is, email grow@egcgbrant.ca or go to the show notes page. We're also looking for organizations who want to participate in an educational way or, have some sort of offering day of. So if you work in the horticulture, green space, environmental, gardening world, and you have something educational to offer or something of value to offer during the festival and you want to promote the organization or you want to participate, reach out, please. If you have ever thought about joining the board of directors for Eagle Ground Community Gardens, we will be having our annual general meeting in January. This is just something for you to start thinking about now. We're always recruiting for director positions as well as for committee lead positions. So I will update this when we have the final date, but our AGM's in January, and just start thinking maybe you want to get involved on the back end. We also are hosting a tree planting event at the new greenhouse site on November 2nd at 10 a.m. So you can come. Please ensure you are wearing closed-toed shoes, although it's a little too cold to be wearing sandals anyways, and consider bringing a shovel and some drinking water. We're going to be planting a permaculture orchard. This will give you a good opportunity to see the greenhouse, to see the park before maybe other folks have been able to. Also, Belonging Brant, we mentioned this in episode 8 with Armanda Lambert. Belonging Brant is hosting the ABCD Symposium for 2025 in May, and we are currently planning for the symposium. We're looking for community members to come join our committee. So if this is something that interests you, you want to learn more about ABCD, asset-based community development, shoot me a message. And finally, for my organizations that are listening, I have a couple of recommendations for you. If you haven't gotten to it yet, episode 9 with Roger Doran is about seed money. It's a fundraising platform for community gardens. It is a global platform. Please check out that episode and register for a seed money campaign. Your registration has to be in by November 12th, and then the campaign for anyone listening runs from November 15th to December 15th. And look into all the campaigns that are running and please consider donating. There is an Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure Grant due October 31st. If you've ever thought about building a greenhouse with your community garden organization, this may be a grant opportunity for you. And if you just Google Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure, it should come up. It's due by October 31st. There's also a grant right now through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. It's their Grow Grant. It's due by November 4th. And this allows various organizations to sustain their operations. It has nothing to do with gardening. But if you have been looking for an operations or a programming grant, this may be the grant for you. So I just wanted to share some of these pieces with you. I apologize. This is a little bit longer than normal. It's because I love to talk. Yeah, we're at 8 minutes. So I'm going to let you go. We're going to get into the episode now. I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can always reach out to us at podcast@egcgbrant. You can reach out to us through the show notes page at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Email me, message me, send us a message on social media. I'm always happy to answer questions and help you out. Okay, let's get started. Hey gardener, you're listening to the Community Garden Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor. In this space, we'll dig into the dirt with local gardeners of all skill levels to share tips, tricks, and stories from our gardening adventures. Let's get growing. Hello, gardeners. So today we're going to be listening from Kathleen, who is the garden champion at the St. George Community Garden at Sunny Hill Park. This is the first year that the garden operated, and Kathleen did a fabulous job. This actually was the first podcast interview we ever recorded, so there are some technological issues. We recorded this in early June, and we had decided to actually meet at the community garden. We wanted to trial what recording in like an outside space would be like, and spoiler, it actually didn't work out. When we first arrived, it was really calm, it was really quiet. We set up kind of away from the park. And there is a splash pad at the park, so you could hear a little bit of water, some of the kids playing, but it was actually quite peaceful and nice. Our first issue was the wind picked up. The wind had picked up, then the maintenance crews for the park arrived to cut the grass, which was like quite literally worst case scenario. And then we finally shut things down. It started raining. So on top of it being our first interview, it was cut in half. And then Kathleen and I ended up hopping on virtually to finish the interview. And it was also the first time I'd ever used our virtual interview platform. We use a platform called Riverside. And then that was a learning curve, and I actually didn't have the right settings on. So shout out to our amazing editor who I know is going to make magic. If you stick through this interview, I'm so grateful that you are here and that you're listening to this. And I appreciate your patience and love when it comes to working through this first interview. Kathleen and I had an amazing conversation. We chatted about what setting up a community garden looked like for us in this space. We talked about how you can engage children in nature-based activities. We chatted about the dreaded soapy cilantro, vegetable taste tests with kids, as well as losing gardening tools and some tips and tricks to stop losing them as much as I do. There was also lots of resources that were mentioned during this episode, so you can visit the communitygardenpodcast.ca to go through some of those resources, and there's some articles there that dive into some of the topics that we discussed, as well as some further reading and some other organizations that we mentioned. Before we get started, I do want to note that for the 2025 season, Kathleen is not able to continue as the garden champion at the site. She's just had some changes in her schedule, still wants to volunteer, but if there's anyone that lives in the Brant County area, specifically in St. George, it's easier to manage the gardens when you live nearby. If you live in St. George and you would like to champion the small community garden that's there, shoot me an email at podcast@etcgbrant.ca. We'll be looking to get somebody in place by January of 2025. If you want more information on what being a garden champion is, again, shoot me a message at podcast@etcgbrant.ca. Okay, let's get started. Hello, Kathleen. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to chat a little bit about your work within the community gardens, as well as your background within gardening. Just for everyone who's listening with us today, we are currently at Sunny Hill Park at St. George Community Garden. We're here in St. George, just outside of Brantford. In the background includes a splash pad, and there are some children that are playing on the playground equipment, so don't be surprised if you hear some laughter, maybe even some cars in the background. It's just because we're here on location in a park. So let's get started. Kathleen, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your background when it comes to gardening, how long you've been gardening, things like that.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Taylor. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Kathleen Foldbari. I started with Equal Grounds in April of this year, so I'm fairly new to the organization. I learned about the organization from my partner's mom, actually. She saw a flyer in the library here in St. George and shared the info, thought it might be fun for myself and the kids to participate, maybe learn something new, and she was very right. We signed up as volunteers, and we've been very passionate and very excited about caring for the beds and the plants that are in them now.
Yeah, so the community garden here was implemented, it's currently June of 2024, so a couple of months ago we put them in April. And Equal Ground actually ran a little gardeners program here with 7 children between the ages of 8 and 12. And the children with facilitators set up the community garden. There's currently 2 4x8 beds, and they're about 22 inches. So the kids were guided through how to actually start seedlings, water quality, soil quality, things like that. And of course, when we put the gardens in, the soil was almost sterile. It was just a triple mix that was ordered from a local landscape supply company. So there's no active organic matter in it. So the kids, we dug through some organic soil and found a bunch of worms. And then we went through our soil to see if we could find any life. And there was none. So the kids have been working really hard to get this garden going. The program has finished up, but a lot of the kids and their families still visit the gardens. And yeah, I mean, everything's growing great. We've had some water issues here just with the spout, but county staff have been able to rectify those issues. And there's also a splash pad here, so the kids love to run to the splash pad and collect water and then go ahead and water the gardens. So yeah, the garden here, it seems like it's been well received, and it's a very vibrant and active park. So I'm curious, when you come here to do garden maintenance, I'm assuming the park's pretty busy. Do you ever have anyone approaching you, asking you if they can participate?
Yeah, we've been here almost every day since the plants are put in by the little gardeners group, and at least one or two families have approached us as we're watering or taking water from the splash pad or the spout over to the beds, asking us what the gardens are all about, the organization that supports and cares for them, and some questions about how to get involved and whether or not the fruits and the vegetables that the gardens will bear are for community to share, or what that looks like. So the kids have learned some of the details, and they love to talk to the families and the kids especially, and share their excitement with people who come by.
Mm-hmm. And have you noticed that, obviously we're very early in the season for anyone who doesn't live in this area. It's mostly just greens right now that can be harvested from, radishes, things like tomatoes and peppers. We're still a couple of months ahead for those. But I'm curious, out of the things that can be harvested from the garden, are you noticing that people are taking it, or are you finding that there's still just a surplus of greens and radishes and things like that are just chilling in the garden because nobody wants to take it?
Yeah, for the most part, people seem to be picking at it. The strawberries seem to be the most popular. As soon as they grow and ripen just a little bit, to walk by once and there it is, walk by another time, a couple minutes later, and it's been taken and eaten. People seem to like the lettuce a lot and nibble at it, pull off leaves. But for the most part, we don't have any tomatoes, as you said, or beans just yet. But the chard, the radishes, but otherwise in the left bed there, that's closest to the park, that is overgrown. There's a lot there to take. Might start encouraging people to take that or pick at it with the kids. The nice part about it being as overgrown as it is that it almost creates a barrier for the water. Now that the days are getting pretty hot, the coverage over the soil helps the water stay in the dirt a little bit longer, rather than with the other bed where it evaporates pretty quickly, and we've had to water it a couple of times a day.
Yeah, so the bed on the left, that was the bed that the kids wanted to direct sow seeds into. So we actually did that the third week of April. So we sowed lettuce, kale, radish, beets, carrots. There's some peas in there. Lots of early crops. And, the kids are very excited to be getting seeds in the ground. So, of course, we're, overabundance of seeds. And then the other garden we had mostly reserved for planting the seedlings that they had been growing into the garden. So the tomatoes, there's strawberries in there. I think there's zucchini in there. We did have some cucamelon that died, unfortunately. So yeah, there's a lot more soil exposure. We're just gonna wait for this to pass. I wonder if a storm's rolling in.
I wonder. We could use a little bit of rain. I wouldn't be mad about that.
I would not be mad about rain either. It can pour. We can shut this down. That's how bad I want rain. So yeah, there's more soil exposure in the bed that has the tomatoes and things like that. With the greens, I mean, it's going to be extremely hot this week. We're operating on a heat warning anywhere between 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. And a lot of those greens may start to bolt. Are you familiar with bolting?
Oh, no, that's a new word for me.
So bolting happens particularly with greens when we might get a little bit of rain. It happens particularly with greens when it gets really hot out and there's very little reprieve from the sun. The plants, it signals to them that it's time to reproduce in their life cycle, their life's done. So the leaves will turn super bitter, and the plant, lettuce, spinach, any of them, it'll get really tall really fast. And it'll start to put on little flower buds, and that's the reproduction cycle. So now it's going to go and in turn start producing seed. So the second you see greens starting to bolt, you can still absolutely eat them, but they taste terrible. It's not good. Yeah. And this is why it's really difficult in this area, at least, to grow things like lettuce, kale directly throughout the June, July, or July and August time, just because it's so hot out. So definitely I would encourage you to try and get some of those greens out of there and keep an eye on them this week, and just don't be surprised if you notice that they're getting tall really fast. You absolutely could choose to leave the bolted plants in the garden. However, it takes a really long time for that seed to produce, and there's very valuable real estate. There's only 2 garden beds, right? So you could choose to just the second they bolt, pull it out and go in and sow some new seeds. That way you're not waiting for months and months for the seed to produce just so you can save it. So, or your alternative is to let it grow really tall. It's going to put on these little tiny yellow flowers. The pollinators are going to come through and start pollinating them, and then you'll eventually have these long seed pods that are green, and they'll dry out, and then you could harvest them. So it's ultimately up to you, but because there's not a lot of real estate here, you could just pull them out. So yeah, hopefully you can get through some of that lettuce this week. So did you grow up gardening, or has this kind of been a newer venture for you?
This is very new for me. My mom was a big gardener as a kid. She always had beds in the backyard and plants inside, beans and flowers and all sorts of things. And over the years, through my childhood and through my teenage years, even into my early adulthood, she always tried to get me excited about it, invite me to the greenhouse or the plant shop to just be one with the flowers. But I didn't really pick it up at that time. But now that I have kids and I've seen them get excited about planting and watching something grow, I think that's inspired me to take it up now. And the older I get, the more I realize that I'm more like my mom than I realized. And a lot of her hobbies, like gardening and baking and things like that, have become my hobbies now as well.
Yeah, and they also probably take you back a little bit to childhood. And it's something that, you have those memories. You can now share those with your children and with the broader community as well. That's amazing. I love to hear that. So speaking of children, I know that you're very passionate about engaging children when it comes to gardening. And I'm just curious, what does that experience look like with your own family and with the broader community? And what are some things that you do to help, kind of enamor your children with nature?
Good question. Yeah, we have 5 kids and they all have very different personalities and very different interests. So we've had a lot of conversations around the dinner table about taking care of plants, the plant process and how they grow and how plants need water. Funny enough, my boys are seem to be the most excited. I have almost 2-year-old little guy and my biggest is almost 6. And they'll ask me or wake up in the morning and ask if the garden's been watered, if they can come with me. So we've developed a new routine of driving around. We're just down the corner there, driving around past the park, checking on the beds, and then taking them to school after that. The girls, for them, they weren't super excited right off the bat. They were excited to see what the plants look like and watch the fruit grow once we got there. But just seeing the bare soil and waiting for those little sprouts to grow, that wasn't as exciting for them as it was for my boys. But they've helped bring watering cans over and check on the beds when they come to the park on their bikes. And once we've gotten here and they see the boys start to water, see their friends asking questions about it, then in being right beside the beds and in the environment and the spirit of it all, then they tend to get excited, even if it's not a thought for them while they're out of sight or while we're at home. The girls getting excited when they're here and they see it and their friends are getting excited about it. That seems to be their prime time to want to connect with the beds and share what they know about it. We are a blended family, so moved to the area about, going on 3 years ago now. And it's been wonderful for us. If only we had a garden sooner. But we've went out to visit Earl Haig and a couple of the other ones that were set up before. We're excited to see the ones set up here in St. George. And it's been a wonderful bonding exercise for us as a family with the new-ish community and with the new-ish blended family that we have. It's really brought us together and given us a lot of conversation topics, and I think that's a wonderful thing. It's more than just plants growing in a bed. It's the spirit of it all and the sense of responsibility that it's teaching the kids and all that. That's been really great for us.
Amazing. And then you guys also garden at your own home. How have the kids been involved with that, and what types of things are you growing?
Yes, yeah, we set up a couple of beds similar to the ones here in the park with what is it called? The steel frame.
The galvanized steel, yeah. Galvanized steel beds are a alternative to wood. They don't break down, and you can get them in a variety of sizes. So we started switching a lot of our community gardens over to galvanized steel. You can purchase them a little bit taller, so they help with folks who may have mobility issues and bending down. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. Didn't know that all that, but
Yeah.
this seemed great too. We had wooden flower beds when we moved in, and the wood was starting to rot. So we thought, what else could we do? And thought, but we planted cucumber and only cucumber last year, and let the raspberries that were in the garden already grow. This year we've got cucumber. We planted a couple of zucchini plants. We've got some beans out there, a couple of tomato plants, some peas. And we planted some cantaloupe earlier in the season. Unfortunately, that didn't make it. And then we've got some herbs in the far bed in the back and in the front as well. Those seem to be doing pretty well, especially our cilantro. It's a big bush now. Yeah.
So remember how we were talking about bolting with the lettuce and things like that? Cilantro is the queen of bolting. She gets the slightest bit of heat and she'll shoot up. But the nice thing when cilantro bolts, it actually puts on seed, which is then coriander. So you're able to harvest the coriander to use as seeds next year or to use in your actual kitchen. So again, don't be surprised if your cilantro bolts this week. It's going to get really bushy, really tall, and it starts to taste even worse than it already is.
Apparently there's two different types of people in the world.
Yes.
There's the ones who love cilantro,
Yeah.
and for the other folks it tastes like soap to them.
Yeah, so it's actually in your DNA. I did a 23andMe DNA test once, and one of the attributes that it tests for is if you have the cilantro soap genetic thing. I do not have it, but I would never eat cilantro on its own, but I probably would still eat it on food. Like, I'm not going to melt. But yeah, there's certainly people who genuinely, it tastes terrible to them. So if you're one of those folks, I'm so sorry. But it's going to bolt, so you could be happy. But yeah, again, don't be surprised if your cilantro bolts. It's very, very common, and it happens to everyone. I actually have a hard time growing it. Like, even my seedlings will bolt.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea that it was such a bolter like that. It's cool
Yeah,
to see it live in action that way. It does have a couple of the sprouts or the flowers.
Sounds
on
like
the
it's
end
bolting.
already.
Yeah, so it'll put on coriander seed, and again, you can use it in your kitchen, or you can go ahead and sow more. And don't be surprised if next year, where the seeds drop, if you actually get some cilantro growing again. So
cool.
Yeah, coriander or cilantro's fun that way. It's a good one actually to engage with the kids because its life cycle is so small, right?
Okay. And so then this year we ran a little gardeners program at Sunny Hill Park, which is Sunny Hill Community Garden down in St. George. We did it in tandem with the library and the County of Brant. And through that program, 7 children between the ages of 8 and 12 set up a community garden. There's 2 garden beds. They're 8x4, 22 inches tall. And the kids actually had started seedlings in the library. They grew them in this little greenhouse, and community members got to see and get involved. And then later in May, they went and they planted them out into the garden. Now, you were there the day that they planted them out in the garden. I was not. And I'm wondering if you can recap kind of your experience with the little gardeners, with planting the community garden there, and, how it was received in the kids' participation.
For sure, yeah. That was an exciting day. It was exciting to get to meet the group and watch them interact together and learn about plants. They started with an activity. Alma and Dara, Alma, the board member that was facilitating the group, and Dara, the volunteer from the county that was helping out. They had the group do these plans for the garden beds before they took the plants out from the greenhouse to take them and plant them. They got a little paper with a grid on them, and you could see some of the kids were really interested in making sure they got their plan and their map of where to put everything just right. And they were very focused on the distance that some plants needed and what they wanted to put on the right and the left of the beds and where the sunshine would shine most during the day. And other kids, they seemed to be less interested in the plan and more excited about getting the plants out and getting creative with where they wanted to put them while standing beside the beds and being able to visualize it right on. And it was cool to see them walk out with the plants that they had grown and the little seedlings. They were telling us about what that process looked like and how they got from small to big and took their little shovels. And some of them were more keen on taking the shovels to the dirt and creating little holes to put the seedlings in. And some of them gravitated towards the water spout to fill up the watering cans. And it was really inspiring to see them all kind of gravitate towards their own roles to help out and make sure that all the plants got planted. And turns out we had the group had more than enough to plant in the beds, and some extras that they got to take home with their families to plant in their own gardens.
Yeah, the kids really took ownership of some of the plants that they grew. In the days or in the weeks following the sessions that we have with them, their first priority was to run out to the garden and see how their plants were doing. One child, he was growing marigolds, and the last session we had on June 4th, he was in absolute disbelief that the marigold was about to bloom. He couldn't believe it. It was really sweet to see, and it was great to see these group of kids working together and, again, taking ownership over the work that they've been producing. We did a lot of harvesting as well, which was very special. Again, even the parents are wait a minute, you just grew this, and now we get to take it home. They just couldn't believe that that was even possible. So yeah, they worked together a lot, and they were really good about working as a team to make sure everything got done.
Absolutely. What a cute bunch.
Have you had any interactions with children when you're in the community garden that kind of sticks with you? It's pretty close to the splash park there, as we heard earlier. And there's also a very large park. There's a gazebo. Very often they're throwing birthday parties there. I'm just curious if you've had any interactions at the garden with anyone.
Yes, quite a few interactions, actually. Almost every time we go, and lately we've been visiting it daily since the weather's been hot, and trying to water it in the morning and a little bit in the afternoon or the evenings. And at least one or two families, adults and kids included, have come up to the gardens to check it out, to see what's growing there, and to ask questions about what Equal Grounds is all about, and how it impacts the community, who can share the wealth of what's grown, and who's been planting them and taking care of them. And as I mentioned earlier, it's my kids that get most excited about being able to share their participation or their role in taking care of the community gardens. And we're excited to share that the hard work that the little gardeners have put into making the beds what they are now, full with fruits and vegetables. It sounds like the St. George community is very excited to have the community garden.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's our first community garden in St. George, and it's a very small community for folks who have never been. I don't know the population, but there's 2 stoplights, just for context. So it is very small.
Teeny tiny.
It's just on the outskirts of Brantford. And yeah, it's in a really good location. It's right next to the library, splash pad, nice big park. We were recording earlier in a soccer field. So it's in a really great spot. And if you're in the area, we encourage everyone to go visit. You can go water, weed, and harvest anytime. Anyone's welcome. Do you have any advice that you would give other parents who are trying to engage children in nature-based activities? And, what are some practices that you put into place?
For sure. Not that I'm top of the expert chain, but from the couple of months or the experience that we've had planting in our own backyard and with the taking care of the plants in the community garden, I think what's worked best for our family and to get the kids excited about it has been just being around and present. I think we gravitate towards the park naturally. We're just around the corner and come to visit the playground and the splash pad often. But creating a routine like we have, coming to visit it in the morning before school and in the afternoon, has been great for the kids, where they learn to expect, and they've learned the routine of what to check for weeds and how much water to add to it. And they have conversation. We have started to have conversations in the morning about what the weather's going to be like. Is it going to rain? Is it not? And putting all those pieces together. We've had a lot of conversations around the dinner table as well, updates about the garden and who's excited to water it next and what's being grown, how are the herbs doing, or how are the strawberry plants doing, and things like that. And just constantly talking about it and relating it to other things in life in terms of care and responsibility, and something to do together for ourselves that's good for us and for the community as well, has made a big impact for our family. So I guess all that to say is that keep talking about it with the kids and bring them there, help them see the growth from little seedlings or sprouts to the big plants and how they become, and the story from the start of the season to where we are now. And I'm guessing through the the planting season into the fall. That story is what seems to stick with the kids and what they get excited about. What does the next chapter hold for us in terms of the community garden?
Yeah, hyping them up. And then last year we ran a very large Little Gardeners program at Earl Haig. It was drop-in style, families, siblings, everyone was welcome to come. And it was very, very relaxed. And the priority for every single family and every single child was to get their watering cans filled and go in water. That just seems to be the number one task that they love, but also taste testing. Even with the St. George Little Gardeners that we just ran on the last session on June 4th, I brought a big container of seasonal produce, and we actually went through every piece to taste it, to feel it, to smell it, and see if they recognized it. And some of them did, some of they didn't, but they ate like the entire container of vegetables, even herbs and things like that. It was wild. So yeah, any interactive component seems to always be really well received with the kids.
We've also explored some cookbooks online, and some of the cookbooks that we got from my mom, their grandma as well, going through recipes to be able to use things that were planted in the garden, radishes, herbs, sage. There's a sage plant in the right bed there next to one of the strawberry plants. And the kids hadn't heard of sage before it was planted in the garden, and learning how to use it in stir fry. There's even a crispy fried sage recipe that we found that is very tasty for anyone who hasn't tried it. And the kids got excited about learning what to use those fresh herbs, fruits, and vegetables for.
That's awesome. Seasonal cookbooks are my favorite, but they're kind of hard to find. Like, we're here in Southern Ontario, we're in Canada, so we do have a winter, albeit the winters the past few years have not been very good, but we do have winters here. And one of my favorite seasonal cookbooks is produced by Thrive Norfolk. I'll stick the name of it in the show notes, but they go through each season in relation to food, and they apply different ingredients to different farms that exist in Norfolk County, which is just neighboring Brant County. And it's one of my favorite cookbooks. I'm able to open it at any season and see different ways to utilize that produce. And I think it's a really great way for them to bring awareness to their surrounding area. And again, I'll put the information about the cookbook in the show notes, but it's just cool to see all the different ingredients that you can find and you can use even in the winter, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a few quote rapid fire questions for you. We don't have to go through them that fast, but these questions will pertain to both your garden personally, your experience personally, but also the community garden. Although the community garden is very new, it was just put in this season, so some of these questions might not apply. I'm going to start on strong. What's one thing that you dislike about gardening?
One thing that I dislike about gardening? Oh, that's a good question. I would have to say all of the tools. My kids love the tools with the shovels and the watering cans, but being able to get everything back and forth, or to make sure that you have all the tools you need to take care, to weed and to plant the plants in the beginning feels like a lot of work to me. I'm very much a hands in the dirt kind of person, and I just use my hands if I could, if they were as effective as I want them to be. But that's not the case, so I do need extra tools. But I've got to get better organized of keeping everything in the same spot to make it easier to get back and forth for our own garden. And there's watering cans now. Thank you, Taylor, at the right beside the plant beds there by the tap, and that makes our job and taking care of it a heck of a lot easier too.
Yeah, it's incredible what just your hands and like a hand trowel can do for you. At Earl Haig, I probably last year I probably lost 4 pairs of snippers in the garden alone.
Oh, geez.
And yeah, probably 4 pairs of snippers. One time I was gardening with a bunch of volunteers, and a gardener had actually showed up, and all of her tools had these big, like, colorful ties around the handles. And they were things like reds and oranges or pinks, really bright colors that would stand out against the contrast of any green. And she says that since she started doing that years ago, she hasn't lost a single tool. So I was like, oh, wow. So I started tying little strings around some of my tools, but I haven't done it this year. And constantly my boyfriend's finding like tools all over our back garden because I just keep losing them. Okay. Do you have any goals for this season, both in your personal garden and in the community garden?
Yes. Yeah. We came up with a couple of goals as a family for our own personal garden. One of them was to try a big fruit. like cantaloupe. Unfortunately, our cantaloupe didn't do too well, but our new redeveloped goal is to nurture the cucumbers that we have in the back. We were able to do a pretty good job growing cucumbers last year. We've planted a different variety this year, and we're hoping to get as much fruit or as many cucumbers off of the plant once it's fully grown into later in the season as we can. We've also set a goal to learn about the different plants. Tomatoes, we learned, are not a vegetable. They're actually a fruit. The kids thought that was quite funny, and we learned about the different seed patterns to be able to differentiate between a fruit and a vegetable. And for the herbs, we learned that rosemary and thyme are actually within the same family. They have similar patterned leaves, and we found a baby, what we thought was a thyme plant. It turns out it's actually lavender, which has just a slightly different smell to it, but that you can use it in a very similar way to rosemary in cooking in dishes. And we're doing the same with the community garden, learning about what's planted, how to take care of things, with the added goal for the community garden itself in terms of educating, giving the kids the confidence to learn and share their knowledge with other kids who ask about it or show an interest in it, and connecting with other families who have a passion for gardening to share the wealth of inspiration and passion for the work and that's involved in starting and taking care of a community garden.
Amazing. So you've mentioned now that you guys struggled with cantaloupe. I'm curious, what was the problem?
Very good question. We grew them from seeds. We had a little greenhouse set up in the kitchen by the window, and I'm thinking it was mostly in direct sunlight, which some of the other veggies and herbs that we planted needed. But cantaloupe itself, I wonder if it was on the top shelf of our greenhouse, if it was getting just a little too much sunlight. We planted 6 little seedlings or 6 seeds in the little pods that you can get in the starter tray. And some of them grew pretty tall before we planted them in the garden, and other ones grew really short. We're still trying to problem solve why that might be. And maybe we could have potted them inside for a little bit longer before actually putting them out into the ground. We talked a little bit earlier about Southern Ontario weather and how it fluctuates and sometimes very unpredictable ways. And I wonder if that had something to do with it too. The day after we planted them outside in the gardens, I think the temperature dipped a little bit, and maybe that was a shock to their system as well.
So did they kind of just, once they got planted outside, did they kind of just like wilt off and die?
They did. That's exactly what happened.
Oh, yeah. Maybe a frost came through and whacked them. Also, bunnies. I don't know if you struggle with bunnies in the backyard, but they really like the little tender guys. With any type of melon, really, or cucumbers, zucchinis, I really struggle with slugs getting the leaves. But you can tell very quickly that it's slugs because you'll see like bites taken out of the leaves, and then they'll eventually just like strip the stem of all the leaves. And it sounds like it wasn't that. It sounds like it may have been a temperature issue.
Yeah, for sure. The bunnies are very, very active in our backyard as well. We had to put chicken wire around our galvanized steel plant beds. My partner put some wooden stakes around each side and then wrapped it around each of the beds there, just to keep them at bay a little bit. We saw one hop over the chicken wire as well. They are big leapers. They are very, very encouraged to see what they can find. Right, exactly. They like our raspberries too.
Oh yeah, I bet. And I guess they're probably thornless raspberries, right? If they had thorns, they might be detoured a little bit more.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
What is your favorite vegetable to grow?
My favorite vegetable to grow would be carrots, or really any root vegetable. I find it exciting to see the greenery get big, and then you pull it out and there's a whole vegetable that you can pull out that you didn't realize was growing underneath the soil, as if the green was the tip of the iceberg, and then you realize how much is happening or has happened under the dirt to grow it into what it is.
Kind of like potatoes. Potatoes have the same kind of vibe. Like I grow them in grow bags and I'll tip them over onto a tarp, and then just like finding all of these little tiny treasures. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Carrots are hard to germinate though. Do you struggle with germinating carrots, or do they typically come up pretty quick?
We did well with them this year. Our carrots are growing pretty well. Last year and the year before, they didn't fare so well. We got these tiny little baby carrots, and it was almost as if after a certain point their growth was stunted. We left a couple in the ground, and over a couple of weeks they didn't get any bigger. We struggled with them up till this year. And I think I'm not sure what the difference is, but yeah, they seem to be doing okay right now.
And is that always been in raised beds?
They have been in raised beds. The last 2 years, we had the wooden frames around our plant beds, and we had to replace that because the wood around them was rotting. This year, it's the galvanized steel beds, and I think that's the major difference. We've turned over the soil a couple of times and added a couple of bags of enriched soil to our beds when we changed them out, but I think those are the only major differences. We seeded them the same way as the years before.
Yeah, maybe a different variety.
Yeah, that's true.
So then what is your favorite vegetable to eat?
Oh, good question. I love all vegetables. I am a big vegetable person. Other than fiddleheads aren't my favorite, and maybe chard, bok choy, those thicker greens. I love tomatoes. I think part of that is pulling them off the vine and being able to pop them in your mouth, especially the little cherry tomatoes. And beans are really fun too. Beans and peas, pulling them out of the pod. I love to eat those as well.
Yeah, beans are my favorite. Or not beans, sorry. Peas are my favorite right now for the same reason. Okay, what's a vegetable you do not like to eat? It's just, if you put it on a plate in front of you, it's just not happening.
I would have to say fiddleheads. I've heard a lot of stories of people going to look for fiddleheads and finding them, and I could get on board with the fun of doing that, but eating them, they are not my favorite.
Not your cup of tea.
Chard, I find
cilantro,
bitter, and we had talked about cilantro too. I think I am one of the soap people, where cilantro tastes like soap to me. I'm excited that it's growing so well in our garden at home, but it's my partner's the big cilantro guy. He seems to enjoy it more than I do. Then we've been sharing it with some of our neighbors as well.
Always divided on the cilantro. Okay, final question. And we kind of already talked about this a little bit with the cantaloupe, but is one thing that you have struggled with in your garden other than the cantaloupe?
Let's see. Other than the cantaloupe, our beans and our tomato plants are outside, surprisingly enough. We have potted beans and tomatoes inside, and we have beans and tomatoes in our beds outside in the backyard. And those don't seem to be growing as well as the indoor plants.
Are the indoor plants like under grow lights?
No, they're right by the window and at the back of the house, which gets the most direct throughout the day. And our plant beds are in the back of the garden up against the fence, and they don't get as much sunlight. It kind of bypasses them rather than shines on them directly.
Interesting. And so with the ones that are outside that are doing well, are you noticing that they're just not growing very fast? They're kind of wilting?
Yes, yeah, I'd say they were wilting at first. They needed a lot of water. We planted them on a stretch of hot days, and we didn't anticipate having to keep up with the watering as much as they needed. And now the growth has slowed. And now that we have a comparison of indoor-outdoor, it's a little more noticeable about how slowly they're growing. Our tomato plants don't have those thick stalks yet to be able to hold up the tomatoes that'll eventually grow.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share about your gardening experience? Any cool tips or any practices that you put into place in your garden that you find really beneficial?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. We're very novice gardeners, so we're kind of going through the learn-as-you-go process at this point. The process of putting up the chicken wire as we watch the bunnies come into our garden and get more excited about the vegetables than we did before they started to grow was a learning curve for us, and we were able to figure out a way to adapt. We have a raspberry plant that was in the garden that we had to transplant, and had never transplanted a raspberry before. We looked at timing for raspberry transplanting, and we weren't quite on point with that, but being able to put them in very moist, thick soil. We pre-watered the soil before putting the roots of the raspberry plant back into the ground. Seemed to help well. We've got a full bush of raspberries already, that some green and some that are already ripe and red, and I attribute that to the pre-watering process that we went through. I think for anybody looking to transplant bushes or raspberries like that, I would highly recommend that process. We also learned about zucchinis too, where they need a male and female or partner zucchinis to be able to grow properly, which makes sense for years prior where we had one zucchini plant that didn't do so well. Now that we have the two, it seems to be it's growing really well. It's big and bushy and has the yellow-orange flowers on it already.
Yeah, well, zucchini, like, it produces male and female flowers on the same plant. However, it doesn't flower to it both at the same time. So it can be, like you said, a little bit of a tricky game where you're trying to get it to pollinate. So it's better, when you have multiples. You can also hand pollinate zucchini. So if you ever struggle with getting zucchini, their flowers usually open in the morning, and you can go out there with a little paintbrush, or you can actually just pull off the flowers and pull at the stamen and go in and hand pollinate it. And that can be pretty successful. But yeah, definitely planting in multiples is going to help with better fruiting.
Cool.
All right. Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate all of your insights. And yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you for having me. This has been an exciting adventure, and it was a pleasure to talk to you about everything that we've learned and experienced with the community garden. It's been great.
Kathleen, thank you so much for sitting down with me and chatting with me about your experience. It was a really wonderful conversation. So for those that listen to the podcast regularly, I like to leave you with a little bit of gardening wisdom to take in with you in your next season, especially if you're a beginner gardener. And today I want to chat about something new that we're doing in our community gardens right now. We are sowing cover crop in some of the gardens. For the most part, it is a trial. It's not something that I've been able to find information on being used in community gardens, mostly in residential gardens and agriculture applications. So cover crop is the use of some sort of plant to sow to help nurture the soil. So in this case, we are sowing the cover crop now. It's actually a little bit late. It's November. I would have preferred to have sown this in October, but you sow the cover crop, it grows through the winter, and then you kill it off in some way in the spring. The benefits of the cover crop that we're using, which is winter rye, it is going to help put nitrogen in the soil. It's going to help with any soil erosion, and it's also going to create like a mulch layer once we kill it off in the spring. So many of the gardens now have sown it, just sprinkled it right on the top. If you have water, water it. It's going to germinate faster. And then you just let it do its thing over the winter. In the spring, what we'll do is lay a tarp over top of the cover crop to kill it off. You can also mow it down with a whipper snipper, pretty much any way to... Some people actually will just crush it with their hands or with like a piece of wood or something. And you can leave the layer right in there, and as it dies off, it acts as a mulch. So we are doing that in some of our gardens this year, and I will keep you guys posted. This is something we've been wanting to do for a while. It's just been difficult to organize it. So we got our cover crop from William Dam Seeds in Dundas, Ontario. And if you live in the Brantford, Brant County area and you would like some cover crop, we have lots. Shoot me an email at podcast@egcgbrant.ca and I can get you some cover crop. Do it as soon as you hear this if you want it, because it really, really needs to get in the ground as soon as possible. Okay. Thank you to the City of Brantford and the Brant Community Foundation for funding this podcast. Also, a big thank you to our board of directors for letting me run with this project. I'll also note that we have an AGM coming up in January. We are always looking to expand our board of directors and also engage with people about the work that we do. So mark your calendar for January 13th. The Community Garden Podcast is administered by Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can view this episode's show notes at thecommunitygardenpodcast.ca. Podcast production and editing is by Matt Wilfred at Nuthatch Consulting, and you can get in touch with Matt at nuthatchconsulting@gmail.com. I've also put it in the show notes. And graphic design is done by Ben at All Day Breakfast. Thank you to our lovely podcast committee, Paulina, Charlene, and Kat, for all of your hard work. If you want to join our podcast committee, again, shoot me an email, podcast@egcgbranch.ca. We're also looking for somebody to assist us with transcripts for the podcast. Please consider following, subscribing, reviewing our podcast on whatever platform you're using. This helps us reach more people. You can also follow Equal Ground on Facebook at Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can join our Facebook support group at the same name. And you can find us on Instagram at equal_ground, and you can learn more about our organization at www.egcgbranch.ca. And finally, if you would like to be on the podcast as a guest, you can email podcast@egcgbranch.ca or visit the show notes at thecommunitygardenpodcast.ca. And if you've made it this far, I do have people that approach me, I love the podcast, it's so cool. And I know they're gardeners. And I'm like, why don't you be on the show? And they're like, oh, no, I could never. And I'm like, no, you could. That's exactly what this is for. So if you are hearing this and you were like, Taylor's probably speaking to me, I am. Email me. podcast@egcgbranch.ca. I want to speak with you. If not, you're going to end up with an email in your box with me asking anyways. So let's just skip that email and just reach out. Okay, awesome. Bye guys.